Hi, everybody. Jake Smith on the Delmarva Peninsula. Bill Colley from Twin Falls, Idaho. It's Boardwalk Potatoes, the both of us getting together for what I would think would be a very special Boardwalk Potatoes podcast. Bill, this is the morning after the Supreme Court decision not to accept Attorney General from Texas Paxton's lawsuit. And it's a sad day for many of us who really were hoping against all hope that our prayers would be answered. Your thoughts this morning?
I didn't think it was going to succeed. But I thought doing this was better than doing nothing because nothing succeeds as well.
Right.
And I was gratified when we saw 18 other states join Texas. And then, even though my attorney general here in Idaho decided not to go with this or get on board with this,
Reason being?
he says, if we did this, then somebody in another state might be able to influence what we do. And so that was his rationale. He's a Republican, so he claims. But even though he didn't officially jump on board with Paxton, our lieutenant governor and 41 state legislators did.
I saw that.
And our state GOP and our governor filed another amicus brief in support of Paxton. So I think that I was gratified to see that. But it seems to me that this now is a fait accompli. And
no, there's no question, Bill. It's over. There's no question. But much in politics is symbolism. There is a lot of symbolism in politics. And when you look, when much of the Republican Party in this crisis looks and sounds more like Ben Sasse, I think the Republican Party is in deep doo-doo here. They are with me, and they are, even though I'm no longer a Republican because I've had enough, but many Republicans have had enough with the BS with the Republican Party. They've actually had enough. Trump has the opportunity in the next 3 years to either change the party at the root core of the party or create another party, as Teddy Roosevelt did. Your thoughts?
Trump would take a lot of people with him. And there are certain things that Ben Sasse has done that I appreciate, but he's among those. I was talking with you about virtue signalers just before we started talking on this broadcast, and you got people like Ben Sasse, and then if you look at people like the Never Trumper, we talked about him in past broadcasts, Eric Erickson.
Yeah,
these are people that they think that first of all they're always telling me they're a better Christian than I am. They're always telling me they're a better conservative than I am. I'm sick of it. I think that they've missed the populist wave in all of this. I don't know. Their goal in life, they're no better than liberals who are trying to say, okay, this is the way we have to live and everybody else has to get on board with it. And so I think that folks like Sasse and people like Erickson, their days are going to be numbered because someone's going to come along and primary them. The Republican establishment has not yet realized, and I've heard Limbaugh talking about this, they have not yet realized Trump opened the door. He was the savior of the Republican Party. The party was not going to continually succeed with people talking about tuition tax credits for their wealthy suburbanite base, which got smaller and smaller and smaller. They had to appeal to people in flyover country, and Trump did that like no one since Reagan, and maybe even more so than Reagan. And you don't want to throw that away, and I think there's a danger of them doing that. And then some of these people, it's not just virtue signaling to try to, they want to be invited to all the right parties and want the newspaper editorial to say nice things about them. But again, it comes back to that. They think they're better than everybody else. That's Erickson, that's Sasse. And I'm sorry, but I don't see it.
Much is being hung on this Senate race in Georgia. And I'd like to point out to our Boardwalk Potatoes podcast viewers, Kelly Lefler. Everyone's talking about Kelly. We got to get Kelly Lefler reelected. And I agree, we do in Georgia. But here's the thing. Back in January, when there was an intel briefing given to the deep state about the pandemic that was heading this way, Kelly Lefler was one of those people who sat in and got firsthand information back in January of this year about the impending pandemic. Now, what did Kelly Lefler do? Did she get on the phone with her constituents in Georgia and let them know what was coming so they could prepare? No, she got on the phone with who, Bill? Her stockbroker. Yep. And she dumped millions of dollars in stocks that her and her husband had because they had insider trading information. That's what it was. So that's who the Republicans are hanging their hat on. Is it someone like President Trump who puts the country first? No, it's Kelly Lefler who puts her 401k account and a brokerage account for us, Bill. And I mean, that's the truth.
I've had so many people tell me that voting for the lesser of two evils just leaves you with evil. That the conundrum, though, at this point is if we don't get behind Purdue and Lefler, the results would be far worse than we could. So you almost have to hold your nose as a Georgian and go vote for them. I don't know of any other way to do this. And then you can go and clean that up later. But for now, this is really the last line of defense. We have flawed candidates, but we have to get behind them.
It never gets cleaned up, though, does it, Bill?
No, not in the current situation. I will say this, though. When I was reading this morning about Alan West's comments last night,
I saw them.
When Alan West said that sent, you see all the mocking coming from the establishment Republicans and from the folks in mainstream media. But those are people who, I mean, Alan West could snap their necks in a split second. You know, he is what you'd call he's like John Wayne. And here's a guy who's speaking for traditional values in America and our traditional patriotism. And you've got these other folks out there who are just the media. They mock him for saying this, but that's because if he walked into a room and they were face to face with him, they'd wet themselves. He says that. There's something to keep in mind here. Texas is so big that if Texas ever did decide to secede, first of all, who's going to stop them? But this is not like 1865. All of the might in this country does no longer exist in the Northeast, or the Great Lakes region. But if Texas decided to secede, who'd stop them?
Economic might.
Number two, I'm not really a big fan of secession, the idea of it right now. I think we're better off even with the differences, is a unified country of 50 states. But if Texas were to go, that suddenly means they take so many members of the House of Representatives with them. They take their 2 senators with them. And all of a sudden, that means the Democrats hold sway nationally. And that would convince a lot of other countries or states that would never contemplate secession to say, you know what? Maybe we're going to throw in our lot with Texas because that's the best deal we're going to get. We're not going to be controlled by the elites on the coasts. And if that were to happen, there would be this sort of a snowballing effect that would take place. And our caller, Rick, remember Rick died a couple of years ago. He was a great caller. He used to work at the State Department.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to call our shows when I was in Delaware, and I knew he called your show as well.
He did.
But he was a brilliant man, and he once said to me, if this were to happen, and he predicted it would, he said, within 10 years, you know, in San Francisco, they're up to their knees in poop. They'd be begging the flyover country folks to come bail them out. And when that would happen a decade from now, then all of a sudden we could say, well, tell you what, we'll help you out, but on these conditions. And then, so if we're patient, and West might be onto something here, we'll win this thing without firing a shot.
Well, you know, that's kind of interesting because it sort of it has the same effect as a third party would have if there was a viable third party in this nation, wouldn't it? That party or the power of that party would align itself with the policies and that it supports. And if it's Republican policies, well, so be it. But they walk softly, but they carry a big stick. And perhaps maybe that's what we're looking at. In addition, I think that Mike Pence is not a shoo-in to run with Trump if Trump decides to run again in 2024, and I believe he will decide to run again. I think Colonel West is certainly a very strong possibility to be his vice presidential running mate. Your thoughts, Bill?
West or Kristi Noem, I think the two would be they're in my.
That is also a fair point. Yep.
My 2 top choices right now. And if he doesn't run, they're my 2 top choices as well. West with Noem as his VP. And then she can take over and do 8 years after Colonel West.
You got it all planned out. You have it all planned out.
What we're seeing here is, though, these are people who recognize what the establishment Republicans don't. That this country long ago, that there's a belief. Our mutual friend, John Riley, you know him from your county council.
Yep.
John used to tell me that the Republicans in your state of Delaware, they still believe that somehow they were players in the action in your state capital, but they haven't been for 10, 15 years. Oh. They believe they are, but they're not. What people like Alan West are trying to signal, and Donald Trump was signaling to the Republican Party, is you guys have not been players. And
you've been played. You haven't been players, you've been played. Big difference.
Been going on for 25 years. And
no doubt about it.
And yet you have some people who still believe that you can just go back and if you think that they're going to put Jeb Bush on a stage in 2024 and tell us, here's the guy, Jeb, when he'd get on stage and say, oh, I think we got to love everybody and love will save everybody. And we need to open the border and love those people too. And that way the newspapers will love me and then everybody can love each other. My gosh.
Yeah.
His father was labeled a wimp, which he was not. But I think Jeb definitely fits that role.
Well, look at the damage the Bush family has done with respect to the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, enough said. I mean, John Roberts is a perfect example of that. Bill, there are two issues I think going forward that scare the daylights out of me. First of all, from a spiritual aspect, you and I are both devout Catholics. You know, and I've told you that I have gotten a number of signs from St. Therese, the little flower, the novenas that I've said through this election season, right up until still saying them. But I knew that I wasn't getting signs. And I tried to warn and I told my listeners about it. And I said, I'm not telling you that St. Therese is telling me that we're going to get the grace that we're praying for. But she's telling me, and she's telling all of us, that she is bringing our fears and our prayers before the throne of Almighty God. That's the assurance. So we should be faithful to that. Just this past weekend, I was cleaning out. I was doing what the British called a clear out. And I put this up on Facebook, but I wanted to show our Boardwalk Potatoes podcast viewers. And I was getting rid of some business suits that I haven't worn in, it's been at least 10 years. You know, when you move down to the Delmarva Peninsula, you're near the beach, there's not a lot of need for three-piece suits, Bill, correct?
Lots of Hawaiian shirts.
We did have a boss that we worked for once, you and I, we required us to wear a tie on the air every day. That's another story in itself. But it was time for a clear out. And I took these suits out. I was going to donate them to the poor. And I was going through the pockets. You know, men, if you don't go through men's pockets in their clothes, you never know what you're going to find. And I pull out, and what is in there but a novena card to St. Therese, the little flower. It's been in there for at least 11, maybe 12 years, at the very least. And yet, here it is. I pull it out just a day or two before the biggest decision the U.S. Supreme Court has had in years. But the biggest thing is I looked at the label on the jacket, and what does it say? You can see it, Donald J. Trump. Now, did we get the answer to our prayers that we were asking for? Well, not yet, not right away. But I think that's what one of the two things that we have to, and it's faith. It's a spiritual faith. God has a plan. This nation is going to pay for the sins that it is committing and has committed, and we're all going to be punished for that. Now, we haven't done that, but throughout history, God's will be done. God is going to get us to where we need to be, and it's going to be God's way or the highway, and it is God's way. The other thing is, Bill, and it's a matter of faith. The faith in our election system has been, I think, damaged on purpose by the Socialist Democrats. I had an expert caller on my show talk about the Dominion voting systems and how the Dominion voting system was designed for fraud. That's why it was designed and marketed for fraud, to steal elections. That's what it was. And he was a computer expert, audit expert. So we have your faith, your spiritual faith. We may not have received what we prayed for, and the faith in our election system. Those are two enormous hits on Americans who really wanted the best for us, our children, and our children's children. What do you think?
Well, you mentioned this IT expert who called and chatted with you, and there was a fellow named Patrick Baysham, who's a pollster. He was on with Mark Levin on television last Sunday night, I believe.
Yeah, I did listen to the audio of that.
And Baysham, he ended up looking into the results as a pollster and says, essentially, Joe Biden hit mega millions here. The odds of him pulling this off in the places that he did, it doesn't make any sense. Yep. So we know there was corruption here, but this will not come to light for, similar to the actions of his son. After the election, it's okay now to talk about the corruption of his son, which would have swayed, obviously, things perhaps in President Trump's favor. In 2 to 3 years from now, we'll be hearing about corruption that did take place. But I think you're spot on when you talk a little bit about that the country is on the anvil right now. I was driving home yesterday and had a conversation with two of our very conservative state legislators yesterday morning on air. I was driving home and I mentioned a reference to one of them, a Democrat that she serves with, who I find to be very friendly. And I was pointing out that some Democrats I can get along with, and that at least they're nice people. But I was driving home and something struck me that Burgess Owens said a couple of weeks ago. After he was confirmed the winner in Utah, he was doing an interview, and he made a reference to the evil that currently exists in our government and among the Democrat Party. And I was thinking about this friend I have who's a Democrat here in our state legislature as I was driving home versus what Burgess Owens said. And I realized my friend is pleasant, my friend smiles, but my friend also supports infanticide. And then it dawned on me, evil often comes with a smile. Evil doesn't necessarily come with a frightening look. Evil comes with a smile and says, I'm your friend.
Well, the devil says that too. The devil tells you, I'm your friend, do what I'm trying to convince you to do, right, Bill?
And that's what we've got to be wary of. And we have been for so long. I just finished a Rod Dreher book. He wrote a book called Live Not by Lies. And I believe it's a quote that came out of Solzhenitsyn, and he's writing about what happened behind the Iron Curtain. And Dreher wrote The Benedict Option. And he said, you essentially have to separate yourself from the evil around you. And
Great
it's
point.
not easily done, but this nation is on the forge. So you've got to ask yourself individually, what do I need to do to make myself right with God? And perhaps it is you have to separate yourself from those around you who are evil, even if they're friendly with you, even if they smile at you. You just, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to punch them in the face, but you have to remove yourself from that, what they do, your association with them. They're your enablers, if you will, in evil. It's like friends of mine I used to know when I was younger, and I would go drinking with them. I don't go out and drink and carouse any longer because I don't hang out with them. I separated myself from them, and it saved me a lot of money that no longer goes across the bar,
And perhaps some grief too, if you got
the
into trouble.
hangovers and things like that aren't there any longer. But I thought about this, and we cannot associate ourselves with evil. For instance, some of these coronavirus vaccines, Crisis Magazine has a story this morning, and I was reading it online, and Crisis says some of these lines are made from cells taken from aborted babies. I cannot, in good conscience, then take that vaccine. Now, there may be a vaccine that isn't produced that way, but I cannot, in good conscience, be party to this. It's the same idea, because then you are saying, well, I can have just a little bit of evil for my own benefit.
Right.
That's wrong. You've got to stand back and say, no, it's about his glory and not about my benefit.
Do you think that American citizens, those who understand the difference between good and evil, right and wrong, can understand that God's plan is clearly underway here? In other words, the Socialist Democrats, they're going to destroy themselves from within. I mean, we know what's going on now, obviously, with the Biden news. There's Franken Feinstein, Eric Pillow Talk Swalwell, all these people, all these things are starting to happen now. Is it, do you think, possible that people can sit back and trust in God's providence and at the same time not lose their own faith that we will eventually prevail and be the republic that we once were? I think a lot of people are just giving up and saying, I'm not going to stand online for any candidate again. It's just not going to matter. We're going to be told for years and years, we're going to be investigating this. We're going to be investigating Dominion systems. We're going to be investigating this. We're going to be investigating that. Bill, I don't know about you, but they're going to investigate all they want. Those voting systems are there for a reason, and they're there to commit fraud. They're there to ensure that Republicans never win elections again, at least nationally. Do you think the nation can survive trusting over the long term? I don't know.
Well, a small group of people, you're going to have a lot of, after the Tea Party failed to overturn Barack Obama in 2012, a lot of people simply left the Tea Party in politics. Maybe some of them came back when Trump ran. A lot of them at this point are going to be throwing in the towel and say, well, I always believed that politics was a dirty business and that they're all crooks, and I'm not going to get involved any longer.
So what's the use?
And maybe they will lose faith in God as well. How did this happen? Why, Lord, did this happen when we seem to be on the right direction. I think that you will still have a core of Americans who realize it is part of the plan. And you pointed out that you don't always get the answer to your prayer immediately. I look back on my own life, and there were sometimes I didn't get the job I wanted, or I broke up with someone and I was unhappy and thought this was the one.
Mhm.
And you look back now and you say, things actually worked out better for me in the long run. And you can look at those things and you realize that's because you just were not, you were resisting the plan. And if we continue to be prayerful, and maybe it's even a small group, you may have a lot of people fall around you. And maybe if the country splits in two, maybe you have a God-fearing Christian nation, and then you have Sodom and Gomorrah on the coasts. That has happened before, hasn't it? And I think that we have to realize ultimately he triumphs, and I love this country too, but I love him more. And nations come and go, and if you keep your faith, that's the critical part in all of this.
Bill, we have so much to talk about, and we will continue discussing this and related topics on Boardwalk Potatoes. I know that you are going to continue your war against Lassie Eggnog. I have a very good whiskey that I'm going to be portraying later this week, but you're laughing. But your eggnog tasting reviews have taken on a life of their own, William.
Some of them are okay. Amazing though how many bad eggnogs are put into cartons and sold to the unsuspecting public.
Well, I saw a really good eggnog that I liked in the grocery store this morning. It's made by Hood, and it's a vanilla flavored eggnog. Tastes just like the eggnog my mother used to make me when I was a kid. The problem is I'm on a strict diet. I've lost 40 pounds since July, so I'm staying away from the eggnog this Christmas season, William.
Come the 25th, I won't be drinking any for a very long time. But in the meantime, I have at least one more I have to do a taste test with.
I can't wait to hear that review on Boardwalk Potatoes. For Boardwalk Potatoes from the Delmarva Peninsula, where it's a very mild 60 degrees this morning, I'm Jake Smith. Bill, my Boardwalk Potatoes broadcasting colleague, Bill Colley. Bill, we'll talk to you very soon. Thanks for the time and have a great week.